Beneath the soil of Europe's caves lie the remnants of a vanished people. Massive bones, thicker than ours, skulls with heavy brows, and rib cages built for endurance. At first glance, they tell a story of strength, of bodies sculpted by ice and struggle. And yet, they are the remains of a species that no longer walks among us. This is the paradox at the heart of their story. Neanderthals. Tougher, stronger, better suited to survive the frozen world of the Ice Age than fragile Homo sapiens. By all logic, they should be here. And we. Perhaps not. But the bones whisper a different tale. They belong to a humanity that disappeared some 40,000 years ago. Their last breath lost to time, their voices silenced, their bodies buried beneath layers of earth. All that is left are fragments, tools, hearths, faint scratches of meaning carved into stone. Why did they vanish? How could the stronger fall while the weaker endured? The bones offer no easy answers, only questions that cut to the very core of what it means to survive. It is here, in these silent relics, that our journey begins, following the shadows of a people both alien and familiar, whose disappearance remains one of the greatest riddles of human history. The Neanderthal body was a fortress against the cold, shorter, stockier, with muscles layered thick across bone. They carried a strength unmatched by Homo sapiens. Their chests were broad, their rib cages wide, their bones dense like iron. A single grip of their hand could crush what ours could only hold. They were designed by evolution to endure the brutal landscapes of Ice Age Europe. In temperatures that would freeze us in hours, they could hunt, travel, and survive. Their legs, though shorter, were powerful, propelling them across rugged terrain. Their noses, long and wide, warmed frozen air before it entered their lungs. Every inch of their bodies told a story of adaptation, and yet this perfection carried a cost. Their strength came with immense energy needs, bodies that required more calories, more constant food, more unbroken success in the hunt. Power was their gift, and perhaps their burden. The question presses in. If their bodies were so well built, why were they the ones to vanish? To answer, we must leave the skeletons and follow the traces of their lives. Across Europe, from Spain to Siberia, the ghosts of Neanderthal life linger in stone and ash. In caves once filled with warmth and firelight, archaeologists find blackened hearths, stone tools, and the bones of hunted animals. Every discovery breathes life into a world long gone. Here, a spear point chipped with precision. There, a circle of stones, perhaps once cradling flames that held back the winter night. In one cave, the remains of flowers laid beside a body, a whisper of mourning or ritual. These fragments are echoes, scattered pieces of a humanity that feels both alien and achingly familiar. Imagine stepping into one of those caves, the smell of smoke, the crackle of fire, children's laughter echoing against stone walls. These were not beasts, they were people. Families who lived, who taught, who dreamed. And yet all that remains are shadows etched into the earth. But every discovery deepens the paradox. The more we learn about them, the harder it becomes to accept their disappearance. They were capable. They were intelligent. They endured for hundreds of thousands of years. And still, they are gone. The ghosts do not explain why. They only remind us that strength and presence are not enough to escape the silence of extinction. Here lies the haunting contradiction. Neanderthals had every advantage in body and endurance. And yet, it is we, the seemingly weaker, more fragile Homo sapiens, who remain. Why did nature's strongest vanish while the vulnerable endured? Was it climate, competition, or something deeper? Something woven into the way we think, connect, and imagine? The paradox unsettles us because it flips our assumptions. Survival has never been about sheer strength alone. The Neanderthals teach us that power is fragile, that resilience can bend, and that even the most formidable can fade into dust. And still, their absence weighs heavily on us. We wonder not only why they vanished, but why we did not. To begin unraveling this contradiction, we must step into the world they inhabited and the trials they faced. Every bone, every tool, every silent cave leads us back to the same question. What allowed us to endure when they could not? It wasn't strength. Their bodies were stronger. It wasn't time. They had survived for hundreds of millennia before we even appeared in Europe. And yet, within a few thousand years of our arrival, they were gone. So what tipped the balance? Was it imagination, the ability to picture what does not yet exist? Was it the power of networks? Humans connected in larger groups, sharing knowledge across distance? Was it our capacity for symbols, for stories, for faith in something unseen? Scientists debate, but the answer may lie not in one cause, but in the accumulation of small hidden advantages. We survived because we adapted faster, shared more widely, imagined more deeply. Where Neanderthals relied on strength, we relied on something else, something that cannot be measured in bone or muscle. And so their disappearance is not just a mystery of history, it is a mirror. A question aimed at us. What is the true essence of survival? That question leads us forward, into their world, into their struggles, into the lessons they left behind. The Neanderthals are gone, but they are not forgotten. Their bones, their tools, their faint echoes in our DNA remind us that we are not the only humans who ever walked this earth. Their story is not one of defeat, but of mystery. A species strong enough to endure the Ice Age, yet fragile enough to vanish when faced with change. And within that paradox lies a truth about ourselves. Join us as we follow their trail into frozen landscapes, into firelit caves, into the shadows of their final days. What we uncover will not only explain their extinction, it will reveal what it truly means to be human. Origins in ice and stone. 400,000 years ago, Europe was a continent of frost and silence. Vast sheets of ice rolled across the land, carving valleys and swallowing forests. Winters were merciless, summers brief, and survival was not guaranteed. In this crucible of cold, a new kind of human began to emerge, the Neanderthals. Their story begins not in comfort, but in extremes. Every sunrise was pale and fleeting, every night a test against freezing winds. To endure here required more than endurance. It demanded transformation. Slowly, generation after generation, the human body was reshaped by the weight of ice and the bite of winter. This was not the gentle evolution of warmer lands. It was harsh, relentless. The weak perished, the strong passed on their strength, and a new form of humanity took root. Neanderthals were children of this world, sculpted by glaciers and storms. Their bones tell us they were built for it, wide, dense, and powerful. Their very existence was proof that nature could forge resilience in the most unforgiving landscapes. But even as they mastered this frozen stage, the question lingers. Could strength alone carry them forever? For to survive the Ice Age was one challenge. To endure the shifting future, another entirely. In the long shadow of Europe's glaciers, Early Neanderthals evolved bodies unlike any humans before or since. Compact and muscular, they conserved heat where tall, slender bodies would have lost it. Their rib cages flared wide, housing immense lungs that drew in frigid air and fueled muscles for long, punishing hunts. Darkness was constant in their world. Winter nights stretched endlessly, broken only by the glow of fire. To survive, it meant stamina, not just against hunger and predators, but against the grinding cold that gnawed at bone and spirit alike. Neanderthals carried that stamina in every step. Their shorter limbs, thick joints, and powerful spines weren't simply features. They were defenses. Imagine them trudging across frozen plains, breath crystallizing in the air, bodies radiating heat like living furnaces. These adaptations were not luxuries. They were the line between life and death. Yet such bodies came with demands. A Neanderthal needed constant fuel, thousands of calories each day. Their survival rested on the relentless success of the hunt. In strength, they thrived. In failure, they starved. It was a gamble nature itself had placed upon them, one that would shape not only their bodies, but the world they inhabited. Europe, in the age of Neanderthals, was no gentle homeland. It was a continent teetering between ice and thaw, where climates shifted with brutal speed. In one century, forests might stretch across valleys. In the next, they vanished beneath glaciers. This constant flux demanded lives built on adaptability. Scarce vegetation left diets reliant on meat. Herds of mammoth, bison, and woolly rhinoceros roamed the plains, massive creatures that could feed a band for weeks, if brought down. Yet each hunt was a risk. One slip, one wound, and even the strongest could fall. The land provided, but it asked a price in blood and danger. And so the Neanderthals became masters of these wild arenas. They tracked herds across tundra, learned the rhythms of migration, and understood landscapes few others could endure. But the environment was not just harsh. It was isolating. Ice sheets and shifting habitats fractured groups, cutting them off into scattered bands. Imagine their camps in wind-scoured valleys, fires huddled against stone walls, skins stretched to block the wind, families drawing close for warmth. In such places, every day was a struggle, every victory temporary. This was the inheritance of Neanderthals, a world of extremes that hardened them into survivors. But such a world also demanded more than muscle. It demanded innovation. The skeletons of Neanderthals speak of bodies engineered for raw force. Bones were thick as clubs, dense and heavy. Their shoulders and arms were built for powerful thrusts, the motion of spears driven into flesh. Their hands, broad and strong, gripped tools with crushing precision. Scientists estimate their upper body strength far surpassed ours. Where Homo sapiens relied on distance and finesse, Neanderthals relied on proximity and power. Hunting for them was close-range combat. Spears were not thrown from safety, but thrust into prey at deadly risk. Their legs, though shorter, were stocky pillars capable of propelling them across rocky slopes. Their spines bore the marks of constant strain, of lives spent lifting, carrying, enduring. Every feature reinforces the same truth. These were not fragile humans. They were engines of survival, honed by millennia of cold and struggle. And yet, all this strength concealed a quiet fragility. A body that demanded so much energy, so much fuel, was always close to the edge of collapse. In times of abundance, they thrived. In scarcity, their power became their weakness. Strength alone, as history would show, could never be enough. If strength was their shield, The Neanderthal brain was their hidden frontier. Larger, on average, than ours, it carried a different design, one shaped for vision, for movement, for survival in frozen landscapes. The back of their brains, devoted to visual processing, was unusually developed. In darkness and storm, they may have seen more clearly than we ever could. Regions controlling body movement were also expanded, supporting the precise coordination needed for close-quarter hunting. But other areas, those linked to symbolic thought, social webs, and abstract imagination, were less prominent. Their intelligence was not lesser, but different. Practical, immediate, focused on the tangible world before them. Imagine a Neanderthal tracking footprints in snow, every detail registered, every muscle primed for the chase. This was their brilliance, a mind fine-tuned to the physical, yet perhaps it was also their limit. As Homo sapiens began weaving symbols into survival, telling stories that bound communities across distance, Neanderthals remained grounded in the here and now. A different kind of smart, but in a changing world, was it enough? The answer would shape the fate of two humanities standing side by side. Neanderthals were nature's masterpiece of endurance, bodies sculpted for cold, minds sharpened for survival, lives woven into the rhythm of ice and stone. For hundreds of thousands of years, they thrived where few others could. And yet, resilience can be fragile. The very adaptations that made them strong bound them tightly to their environment. When climates shifted, when new challenges arose, those strengths became chains. They seemed unbreakable, and still, they would vanish. To understand why, we must move beyond the bones and into their daily lives. The firelight, the families, the struggles that defined their humanity. Only then can we see not just how they lived, but why, in the end, they did not endure life around the fire. For Neanderthals, fire was more than survival. It was the very heartbeat of existence. In a world of endless cold, the hearth was a circle of warmth carved out of darkness. Flames crackled against stone walls, pushing back the chill of Ice Age nights. Here, within the fragile boundary of light, life unfolded. Fire gave them heat against the freeze, cooked the meat that fueled their powerful bodies, and kept predators lurking in the dark at bay. But it also gave them something far greater: community. Around the fire, families gathered. Stories, gestures, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Children traced shapes in the ash, learning from the watchful eyes of their elders. Lessons of the hunt, of danger, of survival were etched not into books, but into memory, kept alive by flickering light. The hearth was safety, but it was also meaning. It transformed cold caves into homes. It drew people together, binding them not only by necessity, but by shared experience. And in those glowing embers lay the fragile beginnings of culture. Yet beyond the circle of fire, the night still stretched wide, filled with hunger and peril. The warmth of the hearth was only a pause. Beyond its glow, survival demanded more. Imagine a cave in Ice Age Europe. Stone walls blackened by soot, skins stretched to block the wind, and a small cluster of Neanderthals pressed close. Life here was not lived in vast tribes, but in intimate groups, perhaps 20, maybe fewer. Within these bands, every member mattered. Elders carried memory. Women gathered and prepared food. Children absorbed skills through imitation. No one was idle. Even play was preparation, a rehearsal for the struggles that lay ahead. By watching the hunt, by copying tool use, by listening to gestures around the fire, the young learned what it meant to survive. The cave itself bore witness to their lives, Archaeologists uncover layers of ash, scattered tools, bones split for marrow, the everyday traces of families enduring together. These shadows of stone whisper of laughter, of quarrels, of tenderness, of grief. They remind us that Neanderthals were not faceless hunters, but kin who loved, protected, and mourned each other. Yet life inside the shelter was only half the battle. For the food that kept fires burning and bellies full had to be won outside, in a world where danger waited with every step. Hunting for Neanderthals was not a distant pursuit with bows or traps. It was raw, perilous combat. Their spears were designed not to be thrown from afar, but to be thrust up close, driven into the flanks of mammoth or bison in a clash where life and death hung by a thread. Imagine a group of hunters encircling a massive animal, snow crunching beneath their feet, every muscle braced. One wrong move, and tusks or hooves could crush bone. Their strength gave them courage, but courage was never enough. It was strategy, cooperation, and timing that made survival possible. The bones of prey tell their story. Mammoths toppled, bison slain, even rhinoceroses brought down. Each kill fed not just hunters, but entire families waiting in caves. Meat, fat, bone marrow. These were the calories that powered their massive frames. But each victory was soaked in risk. Injuries were common, and one broken limb could spell death. The hunt was a brutal art, balancing power and peril. It united Neanderthals in shared struggle, binding them through danger faced together. And when the battle was over, another story began. One of tools, labor, and cooperation that transformed the kill into survival. The Neanderthal hunt did not end when the animal fell. It was only the beginning of collective labor. Spears, sharpened stone flakes, and heavy scrapers carved flesh from bone, divided hides for warmth, and split marrow for nourishment. These tools were not crude improvisations. They were crafted with skill. Flakes struck at precise angles, wooden shafts hardened by fire, scrapers worn smooth by countless uses. This was knowledge passed down, refined through generations. Each tool was a product of memory and tradition, but tools alone did not guarantee survival. It was the shared effort that followed which truly sustained them. Men and women worked side by side, stripping hides, preparing meat, carrying burdens back to shelter. No one could survive alone in this world. Every life depended on the labor of others. Through this cycle of risk and cooperation, Neanderthals wove the fabric of their existence, and beneath it all lay a question: how did they coordinate such complex lives? The answer may lie in a language we are only beginning to uncover. Did Neanderthals speak as we do? Or was their communication something subtler, quieter? Gestures, glances, sounds that carried meaning without words. The evidence tempts us with both possibilities. Their anatomy suggests potential for speech. The shape of their throats, the presence of the FOXP2 gene, all hint that Neanderthals may have had the biological capacity for language. Yet no recordings, no writings remain. What survives are traces, symbolic carvings, pigments, objects perhaps worn as ornaments. Were these decorations messages or mere accidents of habit? Still, cooperation in the hunt, in tool-making, in raising children required more than silence. They must have shared intentions, warned of danger, taught skills across generations. Whether through words or gestures, Neanderthals carried a language of survival, a way to bind minds as well as bodies together. And it is around the firelight that this silent language comes most vividly to life, where gestures flickered in the glow, and memory passed from one soul to the next. The fire that warmed them did more than guard against the night. It was the stage where memory and meaning were born. Around its glow, Neanderthals were not just surviving, they were becoming human. Here, children absorbed the wisdom of elders. Here, wounds were tended, and the dead remembered. In the flames, danger retreated, and for a moment, the harsh world softened. Though their voices are lost, the echoes remain. The hearth reveals not only how Neanderthals lived, but how they connected, how they dreamed, how they began to step towards something greater than survival. And yet, beyond that firelight, new challenges loomed. Other humans were approaching, carrying ideas, symbols, and networks that would soon collide with the Neanderthals' world, minds of stone and spirit. Long before metal or writing, the Neanderthal mind left its mark in stone. Their Mysterian tradition of tools was not crude improvisation, but the result of knowledge carried across generations. Each flake chipped from a stone core had purpose, an angle struck with care, a surface shaped for cutting, scraping, or piercing. Archaeologists uncover these tools scattered across Europe. Blades sharp enough to slice through hide, scrapers used to prepare skins for clothing, hand axes shaped with balance and symmetry. They speak not of accident, but of planning. To strike stone in just the right way required foresight, patience, and skill. Passed from teacher to learner, parent to child. This legacy of stone is a language without words, a memory preserved in artifacts. It tells us that Neanderthals did not merely survive day to day. They planned for tomorrow. They built traditions of craft that endured for thousands of years, adapting tools to changing prey and shifting environments. Every chipped edge is a trace of thought, of imagination translated into action. And it is through these tools that we glimpse not just their strength, but their minds. Minds that carved survival out of rock. Yet tools alone were not enough. To bring down the beasts of the Ice Age, they needed weapons, crafted not only with skill, but with strategy. The Neanderthal spear was a weapon born of necessity. Wooden shafts, hardened by fire, tipped with finely worked stone, these were instruments of close combat. Unlike us, who would one day wield bows and long-range weapons, Neanderthals faced their prey face to face. Theirs was a hunting strategy of precision and bravery. Spears were thrust into mammoth flanks or bison hides at perilous distance. One mistake, one stumble, and death could come quickly beneath tusks or hooves. Their survival depended not only on muscle but on planning, on the courage to face creatures larger than life itself. But these weapons also reveal foresight. To prepare a spear meant selecting the right wood, shaping it, binding stone to shaft, and strengthening it in flame. It was a chain of deliberate choices, a collaboration between mind and hand. Every spear was more than a tool. It was a bridge between intelligence and survival. And sometimes, in their hands, it became something else, a canvas for expression. Beyond the world of stone and bone, Neanderthals left behind something far more enigmatic, traces of imagination. In caves across Europe, fragments of ochre pigments hint at color applied to bodies or objects. Simple beads and pendants, made from teeth or shells, suggest decoration, perhaps even identity. Most haunting of all are markings, etched into cave walls and bones. Lines, circles, crosshatches. At first glance, they seem random, but look closer, and they whisper of something deliberate. Were they counting marks, symbols of belonging, or the first flickers of art? These discoveries blur the line between survival and expression. To adorn oneself with pigment or beads is not to hunt, not to eat, but to declare meaning. Perhaps they marked milestones, celebrated kin, or carried beliefs we can only guess at. Imagine a Neanderthal mother stringing a pendant for her child, or a group tracing symbols in firelight, gestures that transformed survival into something more. These were not necessities, but choices. Choices that hint at minds capable of dreaming. But here lies the riddle. Were these truly acts of art, or accidents born of idle hands? Science continues to argue, torn between caution and wonder. The debate burns as fiercely as the questions left in stone. Were the pigments and engravings of Neanderthals true art? Evidence of a symbolic inner life? Or mere scratches without meaning? Skeptics argue that some marks may be the byproduct of sharpening tools, the random result of survival tasks. Pigments, they suggest, could have served purely practical purposes, preserving hides, masking scent on the hunt. Perhaps what we call ornament was simply adaptation. Yet others see something deeper. The placement of engravings, the repeated patterns, the beads carefully drilled. These are not the accidents of chance. They are echoes of intention. If so, then Neanderthals were not just surviving, but expressing, seeking beauty, identity, or ritual. This uncertainty leaves us standing on a threshold, peering into minds both familiar and unknowable. But whether accident or art, these traces remind us that Neanderthals were reaching beyond the immediate, into realms we struggle to define. And nowhere is that reaching clearer than in the care they showed for each other, even in the shadow of death. Among the most moving discoveries are Neanderthal burials. In shallow graves, bodies laid with care. Sometimes accompanied by tools, sometimes by flowers. These gestures speak of something profound, a recognition of loss, of meaning beyond survival. Neanderthals tended to their sick and injured. Skeletons show signs of individuals who lived long after crippling wounds, evidence that others must have helped them, fed them, protected them. Such care goes beyond instinct. It speaks of empathy, of bonds woven not by necessity alone, but by something deeply human. Did they grieve? Did they believe in an afterlife? We cannot know, but the act of burial itself suggests an awareness of mortality, and perhaps a hope that death was not the end. Here, in these graves, the Neanderthal spirit comes closest to ours, not in tools or weapons, but in compassion. And it is in this spark of emotion that we see the clearest reflection of ourselves. Yet the mystery endures. Were they dreamers like us? Or was their spirit bound only to survival? The answer lies somewhere between stone and soul. The Neanderthals leave us fragments of their minds, tools that speak of craft, pigments that hint at imagination, burials that whisper of love and loss, but fragments are all they are. Their thoughts remain shadows, their meanings uncertain. Were they practical survivors who stumbled upon beauty by chance? Or were they kindred spirits, capable of belief, ritual, and art as we are? We may never know for certain. Yet in every chipped stone and every grave, we feel their presence. Minds reaching beyond necessity, hearts capable of care. They stand forever between stone and spirit, leaving us to wonder not just about who they were, but about what it truly means to be human. Encounters at the edge of the world. Some 45,000 years ago, the silence of Ice Age Europe was broken by new footsteps. Across the frozen plains came groups of Homo sapiens, our ancestors, pushing into a land already claimed by another kind of human. For hundreds of millennia, Neanderthals had ruled this world. Now, strangers had arrived. These newcomers were different. Taller, more slender. Their features unlike the broad, powerful Neanderthals. They came from warmer lands, carrying with them tools, ornaments, and stories etched in memory. To the Neanderthals, they must have seemed both familiar and alien. A mirror image, yet unsettlingly strange. The stage was set for a meeting unlike any other. Two species of humanity, face to face. Europe, already shaped by ice and scarcity, now became the arena of a deeper trial. For the first time in history, humans were not alone. But what would follow? Cooperation, conflict, or something in between would decide the fate of both. The earliest encounters between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens are lost to history. Yet we can imagine the scene. Two groups meeting on the edge of a forest, eyes narrowing across the cold air. There may have been fear, suspicion, even violence, but perhaps also curiosity. Did they see in each other the reflection of themselves? Another creature walking upright, shaping tools, tending fires. For Neanderthals, who had known only their own kind, the arrival of sapiens was both threat and revelation. Archaeological traces suggest moments of proximity. Tools of both species found in the same sites, layers of occupation that overlap. These are the faint fingerprints of contact, glimpses of a fragile balance. In that frozen land, every choice mattered. Did they fight for territory or trade resources? Did they share a fire or draw weapons? We may never know each meeting, but we know its consequences. Bloodlines would merge and destinies would collide. The DNA inside us carries an answer. Across the globe today, nearly every non-African human bears fragments of Neanderthal genes. Evidence written not in bones, but in blood. This means that contact was not only hostile, it was intimate. At some point, Neanderthals and sapiens formed bonds strong enough to produce children. Interbreeding may have been rare, but it was enough to leave a permanent mark. Their genes influence our immunity, our skin, even aspects of our mood and health. In every cell, their legacy endures. What does this mean for the story of their disappearance? It suggests they were not utterly erased. Instead, they were absorbed, folded into us. Though their bodies vanished, pieces of their identity live on. This mingling of blood complicates the tale. It was not only a struggle of survival, but a merging of kinship. They were not just rivals, they were family. And yet, even as their blood flowed into ours, the balance of power was shifting. Two kinds of humanity shared the same world, but only one would inherit it whole. Neanderthals had strength. Their bodies were engines of power, their senses sharp, their minds tuned to the immediate. But Homo sapiens brought a different advantage. We were weaker, yes, but more adaptable. Our groups were larger, our networks wider. We traded across distances, shared ideas, and built symbols that carried meaning beyond survival. Where Neanderthals mastered the hunt, sapiens mastered connection. This was not simply two species competing in strength, but two kinds of intelligence facing off. One practical, grounded in the physical. The other abstract, symbolic, capable of weaving myths and planning futures. In the end, it was not brawn that tipped the balance, but imagination, and imagination could reshape entire worlds. For thousands of years, the two species lived side by side, but coexistence was uneasy. Resources were scarce, winters unforgiving. Each herd of prey, each patch of forest became a prize worth fighting for. Competition may have bred conflict, The expansion of sapiens pushed Neanderthals into shrinking refuges, isolating their groups. Slowly, invisibly, they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Yet even here, it was not a sudden clash, but a slow eclipse. Neanderthals did not vanish overnight. They dwindled, band by band, as sapiens spread across the continent. And with every passing century, their world grew smaller. It was coexistence, but coexistence on the edge of extinction. This was more than a meeting of species. It was a crossroads of history. On one side stood Neanderthals, strong, resilient, masters of Europe's frozen lands. On the other stood Homo sapiens, adaptable, connected, dreamers of symbols and stories. The encounter did not end in battle, but in absorption and eclipse. Neanderthals faded, while sapiens prepared to inherit the earth. Yet their memory lingers. In our DNA, in our bones, in the unanswered questions of who they were. Their disappearance was not just their ending, but the beginning of our story. And so, the shadow of that turning point still falls on us today, reminding us that survival is never guaranteed, even for the strongest. Shadows of extinction. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals endured the cold. But the Ice Age was never constant. The climate swung like a pendulum, sometimes warmer, sometimes colder, shifting with terrifying speed. In the blink of evolutionary time, forests would wither, grasslands would vanish, glaciers would surge forward and swallow valleys whole. These shifts brought chaos. The animals Neanderthals depended upon, mammoth, bison, reindeer, moved with the changing climate. Herds dwindled, vanished from familiar hunting grounds, or never returned. One year could bring abundance, the next only emptiness. To survive, Neanderthals had to chase the shifting world, but every change carried risk. A colder snap meant more calories burned just to stay alive. A warmer swing brought floods, drought, or unfamiliar landscapes that demanded new strategies. And though Neanderthals were resilient, even they had limits. The climate was not simply background to their story. It was a force of fate and unpredictable, merciless, and relentless. Nature tested them again and again, and each time the pendulum swung, the cost grew heavier. It was not enemies or predators that struck the first blows against them. It was the sky itself, turning, shifting, and setting the stage for hunger. As the climate shifted, so too did the Neanderthals' chances of survival. With prey scarce, every hunt became a gamble. One successful kill might sustain a group for weeks. One failed attempt meant starvation. Their bodies, once their greatest strength, became burdens. Muscles demanded fuel, immense lungs demanded air, and daily survival demanded thousands of calories. In an age of plenty, this was manageable. But in a world of dwindling herds, it was a deadly liability. Competition sharpened. Groups of Neanderthals may have turned inward, fighting over scarce resources, splitting apart in desperation. Smaller bands meant fewer hunters, fewer hands to share the work. The circle of survival tightened until it threatened to break. Hunger gnawed not just at their stomachs, but at the bonds that held them together. Scarcity strained kinship. Trust could fracture when survival was at stake. But hunger alone does not explain their fading. For a while, Neanderthals struggled with shrinking resources. Another humanity was expanding, quickly, and with startling adaptability. Homo sapiens had entered Europe like a rising tide. In numbers larger than Neanderthals could ever sustain, they spread across the continent. Their groups were bigger, their networks wider, their cooperation more intricate. Where Neanderthals relied on close-range hunts, sapiens crafted new tools, projectiles that struck from a distance, weapons that reduced risk. Where Neanderthals lived in smaller kin groups, sapiens built alliances across valleys and plains, trading goods, sharing ideas, weaving connections into safety nets. In this contrast lay the beginning of imbalance. Neanderthals were not less intelligent, but their strategies were narrower. They had mastered one way of life. Sapiens multiplied many. Slowly, Neanderthals became outnumbered. Slowly, they became outmaneuvered. Every advantage of strength and resilience was matched, and then surpassed, by adaptability and imagination. Imagine being a Neanderthal band, watching strangers spread into your hunting grounds, armed with new weapons, bringing more people with every season. Conflict may have been inevitable, but the outcome was already being written. And so, cornered by climate, outnumbered by sapiens, the Neanderthals began to retreat into smaller, fragmented refuges, where survival grew ever more fragile. As their world contracted, Neanderthals withdrew into pockets of survival. Valleys hidden by mountains, caves far from open plains, these became their last strongholds. But isolation carried a cost. Bands cut off from one another lost the strength of numbers, the flow of knowledge, and the exchange of mates that sustained their population. Inbreeding increased, diversity shrank, and with it, resilience against disease and change. Their numbers fell not with a single catastrophe, but like a slow leak. From tens of thousands to only thousands, then to mere hundreds scattered across Europe's edges. They became shadows, lingering on the margins of a continent now dominated by others. Each refuge was a fading ember, struggling to burn against the winds of change. And one by one, those embers went dark. 40,000 years ago, the last chapters of Neanderthal history were written. Small bands, perhaps only families, clung to survival in Spain, in caves along coasts, in the most remote corners of their once vast world. Imagine the silence of those final groups. The knowledge that they were fewer each year. The awareness that the land was no longer theirs. Children still played, fires still burned, hunts still took place, but all beneath the shadow of inevitability. We do not know the names of the last Neanderthals, nor the place where the final one breathed their last. But we know this. After hundreds of thousands of years, a people disappeared. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. And when they were gone, only we remained. The end of Neanderthals was not sudden. It was a long fading, stretched over millennia, until one day they were simply no more. No great battle, no single disaster, only the slow erosion of a people against time, hunger, and change. They left no chronicles, no last words, only bones and tools buried in silence. But in that silence lies their warning. Strength can falter, resilience can crack. Survival is not promised, even to those who seem built for it. Their extinction was not just their ending, it was our beginning, and their whisper still echoes in us, a reminder of how fragile and how precious it is to endure. The legacy within us. Extinction is never as absolute as it seems. When the last Neanderthal vanished from Europe some 40,000 years ago, their story did not end. It carried forward, not in bones or tools, but in us. Today, every person of non-African descent carries within their DNA a fragment of Neanderthal heritage, tiny threads of their genome, 2, sometimes 3%, hidden in our cells, like faint signatures left behind by ancient encounters. Billions of living humans unknowingly walk with this inheritance. What does this mean? It means the Neanderthals were not erased, but absorbed. Their bloodlines never truly vanished. Through interbreeding, through fleeting unions in caves and across tundras, their legacy fused with ours. The genetic record tells us that where sapiens and Neanderthals met, they did not only compete, they connected. And though their bodies have long since returned to the earth, their influence lives on in the very code of life that shapes us. Their disappearance was not a total loss, it was a transformation. But DNA is more than memory. Those ancient fragments still affect us today. In our skin, in our immune systems, even in how we respond to illness. The Neanderthal story is not just ancient history. It's still alive, beneath our skin. Neanderthal DNA does not lie dormant. It continues to shape our biology in ways both subtle and profound. Genes inherited from them influence how our bodies adapt to the world. They affect our skin and hair, granting resilience to colder climates. Some of these genetic gifts improved our ability to process sunlight, helping our ancestors thrive in northern latitudes. Others armed our immune systems with defenses against ancient pathogens. Survival advantages forged in the harsh environments Neanderthals once called home. But not all inheritance is blessing. Certain Neanderthal variants have been linked to modern vulnerabilities, allergies, autoimmune disorders, even greater risk of severe reactions to viruses. What once offered protection may, in new contexts, turn against us. This paradox reminds us of how evolution works. Nothing is fixed, nothing permanent. What was once a shield can become a burden, depending on the world we live in. And just as their genes touch our bodies, they may also echo within our minds, influencing not only how we look, but how we feel. The inheritance of Neanderthals reaches beyond flesh and bone. It may touch the hidden chambers of the human mind. Studies suggest that certain genetic traces from them influence our moods, behaviors, even our vulnerabilities. Some variants are linked to greater risks of depression, addiction, or anxiety. Others may shape our circadian rhythms, the way we sleep and wake, or our sensitivity to pain. It is as though fragments of their struggles, their responses to the cold, to danger, to scarcity, linger as shadows within us. But this is not simply a tale of burden. Other Neanderthal traits may have sharpened alertness, strengthened emotional responses, or deepened resilience in crisis. These echoes are reminders that their survival strategies were written into their very biology, strategies we still carry, for better or worse. If our thoughts, our emotions, even our fears carry traces of Neanderthals, then they are not as distant as we imagine. Their story lives in us not just in blood, but in mind. And yet, beyond genes, there is another legacy, the way we have remembered them. Not in DNA, but in culture, myth, and imagination. For centuries, Neanderthals were seen not as kin, but as monsters. In the 19th century, the first skeletons unearthed were interpreted as brutish, stooped, primitive. They were cast as cavemen, savage opposites of our superior humanity. In art and literature, they became the foil against which modern man defined himself. But science has reshaped this image. The more we learn, the more the caricature fades. These were not half animals, but skilled hunters, tool makers, caregivers. They painted, buried their dead, adorned themselves with beads and pigments. They were not the grotesque shadows we once imagined. They were humans, with minds and hearts that mirror our own. Today, culture is slowly rewriting their memory. In museums, in classrooms, in popular imagination, Neanderthals are no longer seen as failures. but as a lost branch of our shared family tree. Their story is not one of stupidity, but of tragedy. A people who thrived for hundreds of thousands of years, only to vanish as the world changed. And perhaps the way we've remembered them says as much about us as it does about them. For in dismissing their humanity, we dismissed part of our own, which leads us to the question that lingers. Were they ever truly so different from us? The more we uncover, the more the line between Neanderthal and sapiens blurs. They cared for their wounded, showing empathy that goes beyond instinct. They buried their dead, suggesting rituals, or at least respect for life lost. They decorated themselves, hinting at identity, beauty, even status. In every act, they appear closer to us. Not beasts, not other, but people who laughed, who mourned, who dreamed. The differences, though real, were not insurmountable. Their brains were wired differently, their bodies built for harsher worlds, yet their hearts seemed to beat with a rhythm much like ours. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of their extinction is not that they were unlike us, but that they were so similar, and yet could not endure. And this is the legacy that lingers, a reminder that the boundaries we draw between us and them are fragile, and that survival often comes not from difference but from chance. And so, their story ends where ours begins, in the legacy that lives on. The Neanderthals are gone, but not lost. They live in our DNA, in the strands that shape our bodies and minds. They live in our culture, in the myths we've told and retold, and they live in our reflection, in the questions we still ask about who we are and why we survived when they did not. Their extinction was not an ending. It was a transformation from a separate humanity into one interwoven with our own. Every breath we take carries their memory. Every story we tell about them is also a story about us. The Neanderthals' true legacy is not just in the past. It is in the present and within us. Reflection. Why we survived. For so long, the Neanderthal body was seen as unbreakable. Broad-shouldered, thick-boned, muscles wrapped like armor. They looked like survival made flesh, and for hundreds of thousands of years it worked. They endured ice, hunger, predators, and the passing of time itself. But their story teaches us something vital. Strength alone is fragile. Physical power carries hidden costs. A body that demands more calories, more constant success in the hunt, is a body chained to the uncertainty of nature. In good times, such strength was unmatched. In times of scarcity, it became a burden. The paradox is cruel. The very traits that made them champions of survival also tied them tightly to an environment that could turn against them at any moment. When the sky darkened, when herds moved away, when strangers entered their lands, raw power was no shield. Survival is never about might alone. It is about balance, adaptation, the ability to bend rather than break. Neanderthals remind us that endurance is not measured by muscle, but by the capacity to change when the world demands it. And in that difference, the path of history split. Homo sapiens were not stronger, faster, or tougher than Neanderthals. By comparison, we seemed frail. But survival often turns on the smallest of advantages. We adapted quickly. When prey shifted, we shifted with it. When landscapes changed, we rethought our strategies. Where Neanderthals relied on the tried and true, we experimented, improvised, and sometimes stumbled into breakthroughs. It was not brute force that gave us the edge, but flexibility. A new tool here, a new hunting method there. Incremental changes that multiplied over time into a survival advantage. creativity in crisis, problem-solving under pressure. These were the hidden weapons of our ancestors. This adaptability was not dramatic, not always obvious. But in a world of constant change, it was decisive. And adaptability did not act alone. It was strengthened by something even more powerful: our ability to weave connections with each other. No humans survived the Ice Age alone. For sapiens, survival was collective. Families grew into bands, bands into networks, networks into cultures that stretched beyond horizons. We traded shells from coasts for stone from mountains. We shared ideas as easily as we shared food. Where Neanderthals often lived in smaller, isolated groups, sapiens bound themselves into webs of trust and obligation. This network acted as a safety net. If one band struggled, another could provide. Knowledge traveled across landscapes, allowing new strategies to spread. We did not just survive as individuals. We survived as communities. In the harshest environments, cooperation was a force greater than strength. It allowed us to endure where others faltered. And within those networks, another force grew, something invisible, yet immensely powerful: imagination. Imagination may seem distant from survival, yet it was imagination that carried sapiens where strength could not. We pictured things that did not yet exist: traps to catch prey, shelters not yet built, journeys not yet taken. This ability to project into the future gave us foresight, a way to prepare for what had not yet come. But imagination was not only practical. It gave birth to symbols, to stories, to myths that bound people together. Around fires, our ancestors told tales of the hunt, of spirits, of meaning beyond the visible world. These stories forged unity, a shared identity that transcended bloodlines. Symbolic thought allowed us to create art, to leave marks on cave walls, to sing songs whose echoes we will never hear. In these expressions lay the seeds of resilience. For a people bound by stories can survive hardships that would shatter the solitary. This was the gift that tipped the balance. Neanderthals had strength. We had imagination. And imagination, when paired with cooperation and adaptability, was enough to change the destiny of humanity. But if imagination is our strength, what does it say about who we are and who they were? The extinction of Neanderthals is not just their story, it is also ours. For in their absence, we inherited the earth, but their presence in our DNA and in the echoes of their lives reminds us that humanity is not defined by survival alone. To be human is not to be the strongest nor the most resilient. It is to endure through connection, empathy, and the ability to imagine something greater than the moment. It is to care for the weak, to bury the dead, to dream of futures unseen. Neanderthals shared much of this with us. They too cared, they too mourned, they too reached for meaning. And perhaps the true difference between us was not as vast as we once believed. Their story forces us to ask, what truly kept us here when they are gone? And what does it mean to carry their memory within us? In the end, the Neanderthals did not fall with a single blow. They faded, slowly, quietly, until their voices were silenced. But silence itself can speak. Their disappearance is a warning. Strength can falter. Adaptation can fail. Survival is never guaranteed, even to those who seem unshakable. The Neanderthals remind us of how fragile our place on this planet truly is. We endure not because we are destined to, but because we fight to, together, every day. And so their silence is not only an ending, it is a mirror held up to us, asking whether we too will one day vanish. or whether we have learned enough from their story to endure.